Yeah. Let's turn to other news now. And in the wake of the federal election, some of the nation's most senior Indigenous voice have spoken out, calling for change. Now, all this comes amid fears that the Voice referendum failure created a vacuum of Indigenous policy that may continue through this term of Parliament.
And there are fresh calls for the Albanese government to outline a much deeper and thoughtful Indigenous policy agenda, which follows an election that largely steered clear of Indigenous affairs, with the exception of the coalition targeting Welcome to Country ceremonies in the final days of the campaign. Professor Tom Calma is a Kungarakan elder and a member of the Iwanja tribal group and joins us live from Canberra. Good morning, welcome to Weekend Breakfast.
Good morning, Dan and Fazia.
Firstly, Professor Calma, what's your assessment of what the election outcome means or could mean for Indigenous affairs?
Well, I think the first one, it's unexpected, but it's overwhelming that Labor has got back in and with a vast majority. What it means for Indigenous affairs and other areas is that hopefully that'll mean that there'll be a stability in the way we go about business. But in saying that, also noting that there is potential for some reforms to take place to complement the initiatives that are taking place. So, we wait to see who gets on the front bench, who are the Ministers for Indigenous Affairs and whether there'll be a Minister for Indigenous Health, for example.
And when you talk about those reforms, Professor Calma, that you're alluding to, I wonder if that is around Close the Gap, which of course came out of your 2005 report when you were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner. The Prime Minister at the time, Kevin Rudd, really led that program of monitoring health outcomes, focusing programs for impact. You've now been saying that there should be a rethink. What should that entail?
Well, it's interesting, Dan, that the report came out for 2 years after it was presented to Parliament. There was no activity by the coalition. Weren't interested. It was only in 2007, when leading up to the election, that Labor took it up and Kevin Rudd took it up. And when they got elected, they started to address the Close the Gap campaign, which became the Closing the Gap campaign. Close the Gap is the people's movement. Closing the gaps is government's response, and so activity took place for a number of years. Then there was a change of government again. Then there was relative, not much happening until Ken Wyatt got in as the Minister for Indigenous Health and Indigenous Affairs, and that was just starting. Then we've got Labor, who kicked it off again. We had the opposition, who were critical of everything that was being put up by Labor, and now what we're proposing, what we're hoping is that there will be this stability. We'll have at least another 3 years and potentially 6 years before there is a potential change of government. So we need to look at what's happening with the national agreement on closing the gap, which is a very sound agreement. It has a whole range of targets in there, but it's very much biased towards addressing issues relating to community-controlled health services and community-controlled organisations, which is very important. But what a number of us are saying is that governments need to also look at the mainstream services and make sure that they reform and deliver the services that they're required to deliver. And that's the states and territories and local government. They all have a role. And so there's a potential now for governments who have ruled out, or the Labor government have ruled out another voice formally, either by legislation, and we won't get another referendum for the moment, but by legislation. So we need to look at another mechanism that we can have input into this process to address the needs of all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who don't use a community control service, and also to really push the mainstream to be able to deliver services to reach all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
When you talk about that mechanism, Professor Calma, what do you think that could look like, noting, as you pointed out, that the Prime Minister has said there won't be another voice referendum, and there won't be a legislated model in that structure. So what sort of mechanism is really the art of the possible, keeping in mind the politics of the last couple of years?
Well, that's right, and I think it's again, a bit premature that we've said the government said that they won't have a legislative process, because if we remember, pre the referendum, the coalition were proposing a legislative voice, and so one would suspect that if that was proposed again, there would be much more widespread support for it. And now that the wake-up call has come to the coalition and their numbers are down, that they won't be able to just oppose legislation for the sake of opposing it. So, there was potential for that to get through. So what are the other mechanisms? I think they're yet to be determined. There's discussions about, maybe reform to the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to make sure that we have an effective mechanism in there to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who aren't members of the Coalition of Peaks, but others who industry, for example. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses are very successful and are employing a lot of Aboriginal people and are contributing to society, but there's no avenue for them to get involved in any of these, advice to government. And there's a new Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander economic policy that's about to be launched. But how do we engage with those who are delivering the services, more appropriately, that are outside the community control sector? You look at the role that academics are playing across the nation, and other people who aren't aligned to a community controlled organisation, and there's plenty of them out there. And what we're saying is that we're not opposed to what's happening through the national coalition of peaks and the national agreement, but there needs to be another level of advice to government that's outside of the community controlled and outside of the bureaucrats just making up what they think is needed out in the community, because we know as a fact that there's always a suspicion with bureaucrats. Too often it's the people in the centre that are making decisions for people living in rural and remote areas, and so there's a little bit of a mismatch in knowledge base and relationship with the community. So I think that's what we're proposing. Potentially for a think tank or another mechanism similar to that may be a way to go for government to get good, clear, neutral, impartial advice.
Professor Calma, we're running out of time. I've got a lot more questions I wanted to ask. We've got about a minute left. Look, there's been a public view, or at least it feels like there's a public view, that the vote against the voice has actually become a vote against anything to do with Indigenous affairs. We saw and heard that during the election campaign around welcomes to country. The common refrain was that we've voted against this for people who were against it or critical of it. What sort of shadow do you think that failure has cast over Indigenous affairs? And what about the politics around this? The Prime Minister now also saying that we should be focused on practical reconciliation, economics, as you talked about, and then on the other side, Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price as well.
There are still plenty of supporters for reconciliation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people out there. And I think there was a sort of a resounding rejection of the opposition's position on not recognising country and in not standing in front of flags and so forth. People are not opposed to that. You might hear a few people express concern because there is too much being said, but I think a lot of that has to be to do with education. And I think the two levels of education that we need, one is civics education, so people across the nation understand how we're governed, the roles between the three levels of government that are out there, but also understand what a welcome to country really means. It's an invitation to understand more about us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's about reflecting on those 60,000 years pre-colonisation that existed. So there's still plenty of work to do, but I think we're in a very healthy position where the majority of people have voted and got Labor back in, which is in part a rejection of some of what was being promoted by the opposition, in the lead up to the election, and particularly that farce about that one of the senators was presenting that every Indigenous organisation needs to be reviewed. Well, they have been over-reviewed, and most of the criticism has been levelled back to when the opposition were in power. So, you know, hopefully we're moving forward, and you know, we'd invite all Australians to get involved, to be able to walk with us on this journey, and to understand that you know, there's a role for all of us to play, and the support of non-Indigenous Australians would be very welcome. And we invite you to participate in NAIDOC events, in Close the Gap events, Reconciliation Week, so you can actually meet and understand more about who we are as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
And many, many discussions still to come. Professor Tom Calma, thank you very much for your time and your observations this morning. We are greatly appreciative.
Thanks, Dan.